In my family, success was measured in square footage, German car brands, and Ivy League degrees. My father was a renowned surgeon. My mother sat on the boards of 3 different charities. And my younger brother, Ethan, the golden child, was a high-flying executive who had made his first million in tech before he was 30. We were the Reeds, a name that, in our wealthy Connecticut suburb, meant something. It meant power, prestige, and a flawless public image. And then there was me, Major Maya Reed, United States Air Force, the black sheep. I am a career intelligence officer. I speak 3 languages. I can analyze satellite imagery and complex geopolitical situations. And I am trained to remain calm in circumstances that would make most people's brains short-circuit. But there is no training in the world that can fully prepare you for the psychological warfare of a Reed family Thanksgiving dinner. I remember last year's. I had just come back from a grueling 6-month deployment in a part of the world my parents only knew from alarmist news headlines. I was sitting at their perfectly set dining room table, and my father was introducing me to one of his colleagues from the hospital. "And this is our daughter, Maya," he'd said with a tight, forced smile. The colleague, a kind-looking man, had smiled at me. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Maya," he'd said. "Your father is so proud of you. He tells me you're in government service." Government service, that was the polite country club euphemism my parents had invented for my life's work. It was a vague, sterile phrase that they could use to gloss over the uncomfortable reality of what I actually did. A reality that didn't fit into their pristine, manicured world. It was better than what my brother called it. He called it playing Jane. Have you ever chosen a path that your family just couldn't wrap their heads around, a passion or a career that didn't fit into their neat little boxes of what success is supposed to look like? It's a tough, lonely road to walk. If you know that feeling, hit that subscribe button. Because my disappointing career choice was about to become my family's only hope. The rift between me and my family started the day I turned 18. My entire life had been a carefully curated path, designed to lead to one place, a top-tier university, followed by law school or medical school, followed by a marriage to a man with an equally impressive pedigree. That was the Reed family way. But I had always felt like an imposter in that world. I was suffocating under the weight of their expectations. I didn't want to argue cases or diagnose illnesses. I wanted a life of purpose, of service. I wanted a challenge that was bigger than just myself. The decision crystallized for me after 9/11. The world suddenly felt like a much more dangerous, much more complicated place. And I felt a profound, unshakable calling to be one of the people who stood on the wall, who worked in the shadows, to keep it safe. I enlisted in the Air Force on my 18th birthday. Without telling them, I signed up for the intelligence track. I aced the aptitude tests. I knew it was what I was meant to do. Telling my parents was the hardest thing I had ever done. I sat them down in their perfect, silent living room, the room where they had hosted senators and CEOs. "I've enlisted," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "in the Air Force. I leave for basic training in 6 weeks." The silence that followed was absolute. My mother just stared at me, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears of pure, unadulterated horror. My father's face went white, then a dark, furious red. "You've what," he finally said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You cannot be serious. This is a joke." "It's not a joke, Dad," I said. "The military," he spat the word as if it were a poison. "That's for people with no other options, Maya. That is for children from broken homes who need discipline. It is not for a daughter of this family. You have a vassar-level intellect. You are throwing your entire life away." "I'm not throwing it away," I argued. My own voice rising, "I'm choosing a different one. A life of service." "Service," my mother finally wailed, her composure breaking. "What about the family? What about your future? What will people think? What will I tell my friends at the club? That my daughter, who could have been a lawyer, is off playing soldier somewhere?" And that was the heart of it. What will people think? My choice was not a disappointment to them because it was dangerous or difficult. It was a disappointment because it was a social embarrassment. It was a blemish on their perfect family portrait. It was a career that they could not brag about at their dinner parties. My brother, Ethan, who was then at Harvard Business School, had been even more cruel. "You're really going through with this G.I. Jane phase?" he'd said to me over the phone, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. "Wow, I mean, good for you, I guess. Someone's got to do the dirty work while the rest of us are building the economy. Just try not to get yourself killed." Okay, it would be a real hassle for Dad's portfolio. That was the day I truly became the black sheep. I left for basic training, and a part of my family relationship died. I built a new life for myself, a new family in the structured, disciplined, and deeply honorable world of the United States military. I thrived. I loved the challenge, the purpose, the camaraderie. I found a family in my fellow airmen, a family built not on a shared name, but on a shared mission, on a level of trust and loyalty that my own family could not even begin to comprehend. I excelled at my work. I finished my degree. I went to officer training school. I became an intelligence officer. My specialty became strategic crisis response, with a focus on a particularly volatile, oil-rich region of West Africa. I learned the languages, the politics, the cultures. I learned how to read a situation, how to de-escalate a conflict, how to negotiate with men who saw violence as a first resort. The skills my family saw as brutish and unnecessary were, in fact, skills of diplomacy, of psychology, of saving lives not with a gun, but with words. Over the years, I rose through the ranks. I became Major Maya Reed. My life was one of secret briefings, of long deployments, of a quiet, intense satisfaction in a job well done. My relationship with my family remained strained and distant. We spoke on holidays. I would visit once a year, and we would perform our polite, awkward dance. They would ask no real questions about my life, and I would offer no real details. Ethan's career, of course, had taken off. He was a vice president at a massive international energy corporation. He was exactly the man my father had always wanted him to be: rich, powerful, and utterly ruthless. He lived in a world of private jets, of high-stakes deals, of a casual, arrogant confidence that I found both impressive and repulsive. He was the sun, and I was the distant, forgotten moon. And that was our dynamic. That was our life. Until the phone call that would change everything. I was on a base in Germany, finishing up a tour, just 2 weeks away from coming home. An email from my mother popped up on my laptop. The subject line was simply "Wonderful News." I opened it. It was, as always, about Ethan. "Dearest Maya," it began, "I have the most wonderful news to share. Your brother has just closed the biggest deal of his career. He has secured exclusive drilling rights for his company in the nation of Kiandia. It is a massive, multi-billion-dollar contract. He had to fly there himself to finalize it. It is a bit of a dangerous part of the world, I suppose. But Ethan is so brave, so bold. His father and I are just bursting with pride. This is what real success looks like. We are planning a huge party for him when he returns next month. We do hope you'll be able to make it. Love. Mom." I read the email, and a cold, sick feeling washed over me. Kiandia. I knew the country well. It was not just a bit of a dangerous part of the world. It was a politically unstable, deeply corrupt, and incredibly violent nation, on the brink of a civil war between the government and a powerful, well-armed militia group that controlled the oil-rich northern territories. Ethan, in his arrogant pursuit of another corporate victory, had just flown directly into a powder keg. My family saw it as a sign of his bravery. I, with my 15 years of intelligence experience, saw it for what it was: a catastrophic, amateurish, and potentially fatal mistake. I immediately tried to call my father, to warn him, to explain to him the reality of the situation on the ground in Kiandia, to tell him that his son was not a brave executive. He was a fool, walking into a lion's den, waving a piece of steak. He didn't answer. He was probably at the club, bragging to his friends about his brilliant, successful son. I went to bed that night with a sense of profound, sickening dread. I knew my brother. I knew his arrogance. I knew he would be there, dismissing security warnings, flashing his expensive watch, believing that his money and his American passport made him untouchable. I lay awake all night, my mind racing through threat assessments, through worst-case scenarios. I felt a strange, protective instinct for the brother who had always mocked me. He was a fool, but he was my fool. He was my family. And I had a terrible, sinking feeling that my family, the one that had pushed me away for so long, was about to need their black sheep, their soldier, their G.I. Jane, more than they could ever possibly imagine. The dread that settled in my gut after reading my mother's email was a familiar feeling. It was the same cold, heavy certainty I got when I looked at intelligence reports and saw a pattern that everyone else was missing. It was a premonition born not of superstition, but of data and experience. My brother, my brilliant, golden child brother, was a fool walking into a minefield, and my entire family was cheering him on, convinced he was about to discover gold. I spent the next few hours trying to get through to them. I called my father's cell phone repeatedly. It went straight to voicemail. He was likely at the club, holding court, bragging to his surgeon buddies about his son. The corporate warrior. I called Ethan's international number. It rang and rang before clicking over to a generic, robotic voicemail. He was probably in a meeting with some corrupt government official, charming them, completely unaware of the real power players, the ones with the guns, who were watching his every move. Have you ever tried to explain a complicated, dangerous situation to someone who is determined not to understand? It's like screaming a fire warning at a person who is convinced you're just jealous of how warm they are. My family saw a business opportunity. My trained eye saw a perfectly textbook, high-risk environment for the kidnapping of a high-value Western executive. They thought I was being a negative, pessimistic sister. I was just being a good intelligence officer. To understand my fear, you have to understand a place like Kiondia. On paper, it was a fledgling democracy with a new, Western-friendly government. In reality, it was a fractured state on the brink of collapse. The government in the capital controlled the airports and the five-star hotels, but they didn't control the country, the real power, especially in the northern provinces where the oil was, belonged to a charismatic and utterly ruthless warlord named General Adebayo. Adebayo and his militia, the People's Liberation Front, were not a ragtag group of rebels. They were a sophisticated, well-armed, and well-organized paramilitary force, and their primary source of funding, besides the oil they siphoned from government pipelines, was kidnapping for ransom. It was their business model. They would let a big multinational corporation like Ethan's come in, negotiate a deal with the corrupt government in the capital, and then, right after the papers were signed, they would snatch the company's senior executive and hold him for a multi-million-dollar liberation fee. It was a predictable, repeatable pattern. And my brother, the new vice president, the man sent to finalize the biggest deal in his company's history, was a walking, talking, Rolex-wearing ATM. He was a perfect target, and my family was celebrating his bravery. I finally got my father on the phone late that night. I had just landed back in the States, at Andrews Air Force Base, my head still fuzzy from the long flight. "Maya, I saw you called," he said, his voice booming with cheerful pride. "Did you hear the news about your brother? Isn't it fantastic, a true captain of industry? That boy, Dad." "Listen to me," I said, my voice low and urgent. "You need to get him out of there. You need to call him and tell him to get on the next plane home. Now." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then he laughed. A short, condescending chuckle. "Don't be so dramatic. Maya, I think Ethan's company, a multi-billion-dollar corporation, has a slightly better handle on the security situation than you do. They have a whole team for this kind of thing. Dad, a corporate security team is not going to stop a militia," I said, my frustration mounting. "They are armed with security guards. General Adebayo's men are armed with rocket-propelled grenades. This is not a symmetrical situation. Ethan's deal is with the government in the capital. The oil is in the north. The north is controlled by Adebayo. They will see this deal as a direct theft of their resources, and they will see your son as a legitimate military and financial target." I was giving him a free, top-tier intelligence briefing, and I could hear the disinterest in his silence. "I think the real problem here, Maya," he finally said, his voice now taking on a familiar, disappointed edge, is that you are just a little bit jealous of your brother's success. You don't understand his world. You chose your path, playing your little games with the military, and he chose a path of real power and real influence. Let him do his job. We are proud of him for being brave." "It's not brave." "Dad," I said, my voice rising, "it's stupid. It's an uncalculated risk taken by an arrogant man who is completely out of his depth." "That's enough," he said, his voice now cold as ice. "You will not speak about your brother that way. You stick to your world, Maya, and let him handle his... Now, I have to go. Your mother and I are having dinner with the Sinclairs. Their son just made partner at Goldman Sachs. We have real achievements to celebrate." And he hung up on me. I stood in the sterile emptiness of my temporary quarters on the base, my phone in my hand, and I felt a profound sense of helpless fury. They wouldn't listen. They were so blinded by the golden glow of their favorite son, so impressed by the trappings of his corporate power, that they could not see the very real, very predictable danger he was in. There was nothing I could do. I was still on active duty. I couldn't officially intervene. All I could do was what I had been trained to do: watch, wait, and hope that my assessment was, for once in my career, completely and utterly wrong. For the next 3 days, I heard nothing. I flew from the base to my parents' home in Connecticut. I was on leave, my first real leave in almost a year. I was supposed to be relaxing, decompressing, but I was a bundle of nerves. Every time the phone rang, my stomach would lurch. My parents, of course, were in full celebration mode. They were planning Ethan's welcome home party. My mother was already talking about what kind of champagne to buy. They spoke of his return as a foregone conclusion. "Ethan checked in yesterday," my mother had said cheerfully when I arrived. "He said the meetings went wonderfully. He's finalizing the details today. He should be flying home by the end of the week." But he didn't call on Wednesday, and he didn't call on Thursday. I saw the first cracks in my mother's cheerful facade on Friday morning. She was quieter than usual, her eyes constantly flicking to the phone. "It's probably just a bad connection," she'd said, though her voice was a little too high. "The cell service over there must be terrible." By Friday evening, the cracks had turned into full-blown fissures of panic. My father was pacing the living room, his face gray with the worry he was trying, and failing, to hide. They had called Ethan's company. His assistant hadn't heard from him in 48 hours. They had called his hotel in the capital city of Kiandia. The hotel manager had confirmed, with polite, professional regret, that Mr. Hayes had checked out 2 days prior with 2 gentlemen who said they were taking him to a final meeting in the northern province, and he had not returned. The silence in my parents' perfect, silent house was now a screaming, terrifying thing. Every worst-case scenario that I had run through my head was now becoming a reality. The golden child, the captain of industry, the man who was too big, too important to fail, had vanished off the face of the earth. The phone call I had been dreading, the one I knew was coming, finally came at 10 o'clock that night. I was in my old bedroom, staring out the window, when my mother opened the door. She didn't even knock. Her face was a ruin of tears and terror. Her carefully constructed world of success and status had just imploded. She was holding her phone in a trembling hand. "Maya," she whispered, her voice a ragged, broken sound I had never heard from her before. We haven't heard from him. His company can't reach him. The embassy can't find him. He's gone." I just looked at her, my own heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I didn't say, "I told you so." It was a victory so bitter, so terrible, it tasted like ash. "The government, the FBI, they all say the same thing," she sobbed. "They say to be patient. They say not to pay any ransom if we are contacted. They say these things take time, but we don't have time." She looked at me then, her eyes, for the first time in my entire life, truly seeing me. She wasn't looking at the disappointing daughter, the black sheep, the girl who had chosen a strange and embarrassing life. She was looking at a major in the United States Air Force, a woman with a very particular set of skills. "Maya," she whispered, her voice a desperate, pleading prayer, You know this world. You know these kinds of people. You know what to do." She took a shaky step towards me, her face full of a raw, terrified hope. "Please, Maya," she begged. "What do we do?" My premonition had become a reality. The game was on, and my family, who had never needed me for anything, now needed me for everything. My mother's desperate question, "What do we do?" hung in the air of my perfect childhood bedroom. It was a question she had never asked me before. In the entire history of our family, I had never been the one with the answers. I was the one with the problems, the one with the strange, disappointing life choices. My brother, Ethan, was the one with the answers, but Ethan was now a ghost, a missing person in a war-torn country on the other side of the world, and his family, his adoring, powerful family, was completely and utterly helpless. The shift in the room was a palpable thing. The power dynamic, which had been as fixed and as rigid as the North Star for my entire life, had just crumbled. My mother was no longer the matriarch, disappointed in her wayward daughter. She was just a terrified mother, her face a ruin of fear, looking at me, at the daughter she had never understood, as her last and only hope. My training kicked in. The years of discipline, of crisis management, of learning to keep a calm, analytical mind in the face of chaos, took over. The part of me that was the hurt, resentful daughter went silent, and Major Maya Reed, United States Air Force, reported for duty. "Okay," I said, my voice quiet, calm, and firm. It was a voice they had never heard from me before. It was the voice I used to brief generals. It silenced my mother's sobs instantly. "I need you both to sit down, and I need you to focus. Panicking is not a strategy. It is a liability, right now. We have one job to gather intelligence." I led them, two dazed and frightened children, into my father's study. I sat them down. I got them both a glass of water. "Tell me everything," I commanded, my voice gentle but with an unmistakable edge of authority. "From the beginning, what was the last, exact communication you had with Ethan?" My father, a man who was used to being the one in charge of every room he entered, looked at me with a new, strange deference. He began to speak, recounting the details of Ethan's last email, his voice shaky. I listened. I took notes. I asked sharp, clarifying questions. Who was his primary contact in Kyendia? What was the name of his security provider? What was his exact itinerary? They didn't have the answers to most of my questions. Of course, they didn't. They had been so blinded by the glamour of the deal. They had never bothered to ask about the details, about the risks, his company's security team. My father stammered. "They're working with the State Department. They told us not to do anything, to wait. Waiting is a luxury we don't have," I said coolly. "The first 48 hours are the most critical. We are already behind." We sat there for hours, in the tense, quiet study. The three of us bound together by a new, terrifying reality. They were no longer my condescending parents. They were my civilian assets, and I was their commanding officer. The phone call that every family dreads came just after midnight. It was my father's cell phone that rang, a shrill, piercing sound in the silent house. The screen lit up with a long, strange number, an international code I recognized instantly. Kyendia. My father stared at the phone as if it were a scorpion. He was pale, his hands trembling. He was completely incapable of answering it. My mother let out a small, terrified squeak. "Give it to me," I said, my voice calm. I took the phone from his shaking hand. I looked at my parents. "Do not say a word. No matter what you hear. Do you understand?" They both nodded, their eyes wide with fear. I took a deep breath, composed my face into a mask of calm neutrality, and I answered the call. "Hello," I said, my English clear and unaccented. A man's voice answered, rough and heavily accented. "I am speaking to the family of the American businessman, Ethan Reed." "To whom am I speaking?" I asked, my tone polite, professional. "That is not your concern," he snapped. "We have your son. He is safe. For now. But his safety comes at a price." "I understand," I said first. "I require proof of life." This was protocol. The first, most important step. Proof of life, he laughed. A harsh, ugly sound. "You are in no position to make demands." It was here that I switched languages. I began speaking to him in his own native dialect, a language I had spent 2 years learning at the Defense Language Institute, a skill my family had no idea I possessed. "I am not making a demand," I said in his own tongue. I am making a professional request. You are a businessman, and so am I. This is a transaction, and I require proof of the asset before we can discuss the price. It is a matter of respect. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I had changed the dynamic. I was no longer just some hysterical American woman. I was someone who knew his world, his language. I had shown him respect. But I had also shown him that I was not a fool. You speak our language, he finally said, his tone now a mixture of surprise and a new, grudging respect. I do, I said. Now, please? The proof of life. I gave him a specific question to ask Ethan. A question about a childhood pet. Something only the real Ethan would know the answer to. I waited, my heart pounding. While I heard muffled voices in the background, a minute later, the man was back on the line. He had the correct answer. Ethan was alive. He is well, the man said. Now, for the price. Your son's life will cost you 10 million American dollars. 10 million. I saw my father's face go white. My mother made a small, choking sound. I held up a hand, silencing her. The price is very high, I said, my voice still calm. He is a very valuable man. The man on the phone countered. His company is worth billions. 10 million is a small price to pay. I will need some time to secure the funds, I said. You have 48 hours, he said. His voice now hard again. And let me be very clear. No police, no governments, no FBI. If we hear that you have contacted anyone, the deal is off, and your American executive will die. Do I make myself clear? You do. I said I will be in contact, and I hung up the phone. The moment the call ended, my parents' carefully constructed composure shattered. $10 million, my father gasped, his face ashen. How can we possibly get $10 million in 48 hours? We have to, my mother shrieked, her voice hysterical. We have to pay them, it's the only way. We'll sell the house, we'll liquidate my stocks. We'll call your brother, just pay them. Richard, pay them whatever they want. She was in a full-blown panic, her mind clinging to the only solution she understood, throwing money at the problem. No, I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria like a scalpel. They both turned to look at me, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear. What do you mean? No, my father demanded. It's my son's life, it's our money. And it's my operation, I said, my voice cold as ice. And you are both now under my command. And my first command is this: you will do nothing. You will not call your broker. You will not sell your house, and you will not, under any circumstances, attempt to pay that ransom. Am I clear? They just stared at me. Listen to me, I said, my voice low and intense. The voice of a commander briefing her troops before a dangerous mission. These people are not common criminals. They are a sophisticated paramilitary organization. This is what they do, and they have a protocol. If you show them you can get $10 million in 48 hours, they will know you can get 20 million in a week. They will bleed you dry, and it still will not guarantee Ethan's safety. Sometimes. It makes them more likely to kill the hostage, to eliminate the witness. That is not how this game is played. I looked at their terrified, uncomprehending faces. I was asking them to go against every instinct they had. From this moment on, I continued. I am the only one who communicates with the hostage takers. I am the only one who makes a decision. Your only job is to be quiet, to be patient, and to trust me. This is not a world you understand, but it is my world, and I am the only person on this planet who can get your son back. The authority in my voice was absolute. They had never seen this version of me before. I was no longer their disappointing daughter. I was a professional, and I was their only hope. They just nodded, their faces pale, their eyes wide with a new kind of respect. A respect born of pure, abject terror. Good, I said, now I have work to do. I left them in the study and went upstairs to my old childhood bedroom. The room was still filled with the relics of the girl I used to be: ballet trophies, high school yearbooks. It felt like the room of a stranger. I pulled my secure, encrypted, government-issued laptop from my bag. I plugged it in. The quiet, familiar hum of the machine was a comfort. I was back in my element. The black sheep had just become the shepherd, and it was my job to bring the golden lamb home from the slaughter. My family had wanted a miracle. I was about to give them a mission briefing, and I knew it was going to be the longest. Most dangerous 48 hours of my life. My childhood bedroom was a time capsule. The walls were still painted a pale, hopeful lilac. Faded posters of 90s rock bands were still tacked to the walls. A collection of dusty ballet trophies sat on a shelf. It was the room of a girl I barely recognized, a girl with dreams of art and poetry. That night, it became a war room. My parents, shattered and adrift, had retreated to their own room, leaving me in the quiet of the house. But I was not quiet. I was at work. I unpacked my encrypted satellite laptop and my secure communications gear onto the small, white desk where I had once struggled with my calculus homework. The posters of rock stars were soon covered with satellite maps of the northern Kyandian provinces. The ballet trophies were pushed aside to make room for a hastily drawn-up psychological profile of a warlord. My childhood bedroom, with its faded floral wallpaper, had just become the forward operating base for a hostage negotiation. My parents, who had wanted me to be a lawyer or a doctor, were now my civilian staff. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a combat knife. My training, the 15 years of discipline and analytical rigor that my family had dismissed as playing soldier, took over completely. The fear for my brother was still there, a cold, hard knot in my gut, but it was a professional fear now. A problem to be analyzed, a situation to be managed. The emotional, panicked daughter was gone. Major Maya Reed was in command. My first task was to build a complete intelligence picture. Ethan was a high-value target in a hostile, non-permissive environment. His captors were not amateurs. I had to know my enemy. I spent the first few hours building a detailed profile of General Adebayo and his People's Liberation Front. I had access, through secure military databases, to a wealth of information my parents' world of corporate security could only dream of. I knew his history. He was the son of a village chief, a brilliant and charismatic man who had been educated abroad before returning to his country to lead what he saw as a righteous rebellion against a corrupt government. He was not just a greedy thug after a ransom. He was a man who saw himself as a statesman, a freedom fighter. He was proud, he was intelligent, and his greatest weakness, I knew, was his ego. He craved legitimacy. He wanted to be seen not as a warlord, but as a future president. Next, I turned to geography, using satellite imaging software. I began to search for Ethan. I knew Adebayo's patterns. He had a series of small, fortified compounds scattered throughout the remote mountain valleys of his territory. I cross-referenced the last known location of Ethan's convoy with my topographical maps. There were 3 likely compounds within a 50-mile radius. I zoomed in on the satellite feeds. The images were a day old, but they were clear enough. At the second compound, I saw it, a glint of metal that did not belong, a late-model Mercedes, just like the one Ethan's company had rented for him, partially hidden under a camouflage tarp. It was a small detail, but it was enough. I had a probable location. The hardest part was reaching out to my own network. I couldn't officially involve the Youth-style military. This was a private matter, a kidnapping, not an act of war against the state, but the family I had built in the Air Force, the one built on trust and shared risk, was my greatest asset. I made one, carefully worded, encrypted call. It was to a man I had served with in Afghanistan, a man who had since retired and now ran a successful private security firm in a neighboring African country. "Jack," I said. When he answered, "It's Valkyrie." He was the only one who still called me by my old call sign. "Valkyrie," he said, his voice instantly alert. "It's been a while. What do you need?" "I need information," I said unofficially. "I have a friend whose brother, a corporate executive, has gone missing in Kyandia, Boro province. The assumption is that he's a guest of General Adebayo." "Adebayo," he whistled. "Your friend's brother has stepped in it. That's a bad neighborhood." "I know," I said. "I need eyes and ears on the ground." "Jack, anything you can get me, local chatter, the mood of Adebayo's men, any intel on his current state of mind. This is a personal request. Off the books." "Consider it done," he said without hesitation. "For you, anything. I'll see what my assets can dig up. Stay safe, Maya." He was my family, the kind you could count on when things got real. My parents emerged from their room around dawn, their faces pale and sleepless. They found me in the study, where I had moved my operation. I had a large map of the Kyandian province spread out on my father's desk, covered in my own annotations. My father, the renowned surgeon who was used to being the smartest man in any room, just stared at the map, at the complex web of information I had assembled. "Maya, what is all this?" he whispered, his voice full of a new, unfamiliar awe. "It's a plan," I said simply. "Shouldn't we be calling someone?" he asked, falling back on his own instincts. "The FBI, the State Department. Your commander." "Dad," I said, turning to him, my voice patient but firm. "The FBI's hands are tied. They have no jurisdiction in a sovereign nation. The State Department's official policy is not to negotiate with groups like Adebayo's, and my commander cannot authorize a military operation to rescue a private citizen who willingly traveled to a hostile region against official government advisories. They are all working on this, but they are working through slow, diplomatic channels. We don't have time for that. We have a 48-hour deadline." I looked at them, at their terrified, helpless faces. "In this situation," I said, "there is no one to call. We are on our own, which means you need to trust my expertise." The conversation was interrupted by the chirp of my encrypted messaging app. It was Jack. The message was short. "Adebayo is feeling the pressure. Government forces have been making gains in the south. His funding from his foreign backers is drying up. He is losing face with his own men. He is not looking for a fight right now. He is looking for a win. He needs leverage. He needs to look strong." And just like that, I had it, my strategy, the key to getting my brother back. It wasn't about money. $10 million was just a number. It was a starting point for a negotiation. But giving a man like Adebayo money, especially when he was feeling weak, was a bad move. It would make him look like a common criminal, a simple kidnapper, and his ego would never allow that. What he needed was not cash. It was what my contact had said. He needed to look strong. He needed legitimacy. And I knew exactly how to give it to him. I called my parents back into the study. I stood in front of the map like I was standing in front of a briefing room at the Pentagon. "Okay," I began, my voice all business. "Here is the mission briefing. Our subject is Ethan. He is currently being held at a fortified compound in this location." I pointed to the map. "The threat is a well-armed militia of approximately 200 fighters, led by General Adebayo. The general's primary motivation is not financial, it is political. He is currently in a weak position, and he needs a public relations victory to re-establish his dominance in the region." I looked at my parents. "Their demand for $10 million is a test. It is an opening bid. We will not be paying it." My mother let out a small gasp. "But Maya..." "Listen to me," I commanded, my voice sharp. "We will not be offering them money. We will be offering them something far more valuable. We are going to offer them a seat at the table." I explained the plan. I would be the sole negotiator. I would make the next call, and I would make Adebayo an offer if Ethan was released, unharmed, immediately, as a gesture of goodwill from a great leader. I would use my unofficial contacts to suggest to a certain influential UFAR senator, a man who sat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and a man who, I knew, had been a patient of my father's for years, that the time might be right to open a quiet, back-channel dialogue with General Adebayo about the political future of Kyandia. It was a gamble, a huge one. I was offering a whisper, a possibility, not a guarantee from the Pakutol government. But it was a whisper that played directly to Adebayo's massive ego. It offered him what he craved most, the chance to be seen as a legitimate statesman, not a common warlord. "It's the only way," I said, finishing my briefing. "It's a psychological play, not a financial one. It gives him a way to back down without losing face. He can release Ethan and spin it as a magnanimous act of diplomacy. He gets to be the hero of his own story." My parents just stared at me, their faces a mixture of terror, confusion, and a dawning, reluctant awe. I was no longer their daughter. I was a strategist, a negotiator, a player in a deadly game they couldn't even comprehend. "Are there any questions?" I asked, my tone final. They both just shook their heads, speechless. "Good," I said. I looked at the clock. The 48-hour deadline was just hours away. It was time to make the call. I picked up the satellite phone, my heart a steady, calm rhythm in my chest. I was no longer the black sheep. I was the only thing standing between my brother and a shallow grave in a foreign country. And I was ready to go to work. The 48-hour deadline ticked down with the slow, agonizing certainty of a bomb's timer. My parents were a wreck. They paced the house. They drank endless cups of coffee. They jumped every time the phone rang. They existed in a state of pure, unfiltered panic. I, on the other hand, was calm. It was a strange, cold calm. The kind that settles over you in the middle of a crisis when your training takes over. My childhood bedroom was my command center. The air was thick with the low hum of my laptop and the quiet intensity of my focus. My parents would occasionally peek in, their faces etched with a mixture of terror and a new, baffling respect. The daughter they had dismissed as a directionless soldier was now the calmest person in the house, the only one moving with a sense of purpose. With 6 hours left on the deadline, I knew it was time. I had all the intelligence I could gather. I had my strategy, and I had my target's psychological profile. It was time to make the call. I brought my parents into the study. "I'm about to contact them," I said, my voice all business. "I am going to put the phone on speaker. You are not to make a sound. You will not gasp. You will not cry. You will not speak. You will be silent. Am I understood?" They both just nodded, their eyes wide like frightened children. They sat on the sofa, clutching each other's hands, and I sat behind my father's large mahogany desk. The satellite phone in front of me, I took a single, steadying breath, and I dialed the number. The man answered on the first ring. It was the same rough, accented voice. "You are running out of time," he snarled. Without a greeting, it was at this moment that I made my first strategic move. I began speaking in his own language, a northern Kayandian dialect I had spent hundreds of hours perfecting. My voice was calm, formal, and deeply respectful. "General Adebayo," I said, assuming I was speaking to the man himself, or at least one of his senior lieutenants. "I am calling on behalf of the family of the American, Ethan Reed. I apologize for the delay. It is a matter of great importance, and we wish to proceed with the proper respect." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I had thrown him completely off script. He had been expecting to deal with a hysterical, weeping American mother or a blustering, arrogant businessman. He was not expecting to deal with a woman who spoke his language fluently and addressed him with the formality one would use for a head of state. "You speak the language of my people," he finally said, his voice now a low, cautious rumble, the aggression replaced by a wary curiosity. "I believe that to resolve a conflict, one must first understand the person with whom they are in conflict," I replied, my words a careful, respectful proverb in his own tongue. "It is a sign of respect." "You are not like the others," he said. "Who are you?" "I am a member of the family tasked with resolving this delicate situation," I said, choosing my words with care. "But before we can proceed, I must address the offer you made. The offer of a financial transaction." $10 million, he said, his voice hardening again. "It is not an offer. It is the price." "General," I said, my voice softening into a tone of respectful disappointment. "A man of your stature, a leader of your people, a man fighting for the future of your nation. You are not a common kidnapper. To treat you as one, to reduce this situation to a crude exchange of money, would be a grave insult to you and to your cause. My family will not be paying a ransom." I could hear his sharp intake of breath. I had just called his bluff, but I had done it by appealing to his ego, by framing his crime as something beneath a man of his importance. "You are a fool, woman," he roared, the anger returning. "You think you can flatter me. My men have your brother. His life is in my hands. I am aware of that, General," I said calmly, "and I do not doubt your power. That is why I am not calling to haggle over money like a fishwife in the market. Money is for criminals. It is a temporary solution for temporary men. I am calling to discuss a matter of politics, a matter of legacy, a matter for a true leader." The silence on the other end of the line was long and heavy. I had him hooked. His ego was a bigger target than his greed. This was the most high-stakes negotiation of my life. I was bluffing. With my brother's life as the currency, I had no real authority to promise anything, but I knew my enemy. My father had built his career on financial leverage. I was about to try and save my brother's life with psychological leverage. I have read your manifestos. General, I continued, my voice now a low, conspiratorial murmur. I have studied your speeches. You are not fighting for money. You are fighting for recognition, for legitimacy. You want a seat at the table where the future of your country is decided. You want the world to see you as a statesman, not as a warlord. What is your point, woman? He growled. But the curiosity was thick in his voice. My point, General, is that $10 million is an insult to you. It makes you a criminal. But a gesture of goodwill, a magnanimous act of statesmanship, that is priceless. That can get you the one thing that money cannot buy. And what is that? He asked. A conversation, I said. I then laid out my offer. I told him that I had friends in my government, people who had the ear of powerful senators on the Foreign Relations Committee. I told him that if he were to release Ethan Reed, unharmed, immediately, as a gesture of goodwill, as a sign that he was a rational leader with whom one could negotiate in good faith, then I could ensure that a message reached these powerful people, a message that General Adebayo was not a terrorist, but a political leader, a message that a quiet, preliminary, and completely off-the-record dialogue about the future of Kiandia might be productive. It was a beautiful, masterful lie, woven from half-truths and calculated risks. My father did know Senator Connolly. He was a major donor to his campaign, but I had no authority to promise anything on his behalf. I was offering a whisper of a possibility, a ghost of a chance at the one thing I knew Adebayo craved. He was silent for a very long time, processing my offer. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. You are very clever, he finally said, his voice a low, dangerous purr, and very brave, or very foolish. Who are you? Really, what American woman speaks my language and talks of back-channel dialogues and senators? This was the moment, the final card I had to play. I took a deep breath. My name is Major Maya Reed, I said, my voice quiet but imbued with all the authority of my rank. United States Air Force. And my professional specialty for the past 10 years has been strategic intelligence and crisis negotiation, with a specific focus on the political and military landscape of West Africa. The silence on the other end of the line was so profound, so absolute, that I thought he might have hung up. I had just revealed everything. I was no longer a hysterical family member. I was a professional adversary, an equal. I had just shown him that I understood the game even better than he did. Finally, he let out a single, sharp bark of a laugh. It was a laugh of pure, grudging respect. Major Reed, he said, and the way he spoke my rank was an acknowledgement of my victory. You are a worthy opponent. You understand power. You are correct. $10 million is an insult. A conversation with a senator, that is a much more interesting price. My heart, which had been frozen in my chest, began to beat again. Release my brother, I said, my voice firm, and you will have your whisper in Washington. That is my offer. You have a deal, Major, he said. I will have my men deliver your brother to the front gate of his hotel at dawn, unharmed. He paused. It has been an honor to negotiate with you. He hung up. I put the phone down on the desk. My hands were shaking. My entire body was trembling with the release of a tension so profound it had felt like a physical coil in my gut. I turned to my parents. They were just staring at me, their faces a mixture of absolute, stunning awe and a new, terrified respect. The daughter they had dismissed, the black sheep they had pitied, had just gone head-to-head with a warlord and won. She had just saved their son's life, not with money, but with her mind, with her training, with the very skills they had once found so embarrassing. He's coming home, my mother whispered, her voice full of a disbelief so profound it was almost comical. I just nodded, too emotionally exhausted to speak. My father stood up. He walked over to me, this great, powerful man, this renowned surgeon, and he looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time in his life. Maya, he said, his voice a raw, broken sound. My God, what have you become? I looked him in the eye, the daughter he had never known. I became a soldier. Dad, I said quietly, You just never bothered to ask what that meant. The 48-hour deadline was a ticking clock, not just on my brother's life, but on the very soul of my family. The hours crawled by, my parents, stripped of their usual tools of money and influence, were reduced to what they truly were, two terrified, helpless people. They sat in their own lavish living room like ghosts, their faces pale, their eyes fixed on the silent satellite phone on the coffee table. All their power, all their prestige, was utterly useless against the stark, brutal reality of the situation. Their only asset now was me, their black sheep, their soldier. The call came through at dawn on the second day. It was from General Adebayo himself. His voice was calm, almost pleasant. "Major Reed," he said, "a man of my word. Your brother is safe. He is on his way to the border crossing at Kangan. A car from your embassy will be waiting for him there. It has been an educational experience, negotiating with you." "Thank you, General," I said, my own voice a quiet, steady monotone, though my heart was hammering with a relief so profound it almost made me sick. "I trust the message of goodwill was received." "The message was received," he said with a dry chuckle. "I will be awaiting a call from your Senator Connolly with great interest." And then he hung up. I relayed the news to my parents. Ethan was safe. He was free. My mother burst into tears, this time of pure, unadulterated relief. My father, the surgeon with hands of steel, just sat down heavily in his armchair and buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. The patriarch had crumbled. The homecoming was a quiet, surreal affair. We met Ethan at a private airfield outside of Dialsoan, Nazisau Akhar. Sekikam. A day later, he had been debriefed by the State Department and was physically unharmed. But the man who walked off that government jet was not the same man who had left for Kiandia 2 weeks before. The arrogant, slick, golden boy executive was gone. In his place was a man who looked haunted. He was thinner. His face was pale, and his eyes, which had always been so full of a confident, easy charm, were now wide with the quiet, hollow look of a person who has stared into the abyss and seen its reflection. My parents rushed to him, enveloping him in a tearful, desperate hug. I hung back, watching. This was their moment. Their golden child had returned from the dead. After a long emotional embrace with them, Ethan's eyes found mine. He slowly, hesitantly, walked over to me. He stood before me, his younger brother, now looking at his older sister as if for the first time. "Maya," he began, his voice a raw, broken whisper. He didn't offer excuses. He didn't try to downplay his own foolishness. He just looked me in the eye. "Thank you," he said simply. "You saved my life." He took a shaky breath. "And I'm sorry for everything, for my entire life of being an absolute, entitled jackass to you." It was the first genuine apology he had ever given me. I just nodded, the chasm between us, a rift carved by 30 years of rivalry and resentment, was too wide to be bridged with a single apology, but it was a start. The dynamic in my family in the weeks that followed was a strange, new and unsettling landscape. The old hierarchy had been completely demolished. I was no longer the black sheep. I was the quiet, competent, and slightly terrifying hero of the story. They treated me with a new, profound, and deeply awkward respect. My father, who had never once asked me a single substantive question about my career, now wanted to know everything. He would ask me about my training, about my deployments, about the political situations in the countries I had served in. He was trying, in his own clumsy way, to understand the daughter he had never known, the daughter whose silly military games had saved his son. My mother just watched me. She would look at me with a new awe, as if I were a stranger in her house, a rare and exotic creature she didn't know how she had produced. She stopped offering me condescending advice. She started making me my favorite meals. It was her own quiet, fumbling apology. They asked me to tell them the story of the negotiation. I gave them the sanitized, declassified version. I told them about the psychological profile, about appealing to the general's ego, about the offer of a political dialogue instead of a cash ransom. They listened. their faces rapt with attention. "My God," my father said when I had finished, a look of pure, unadulterated admiration on his face. "That was brilliant, absolutely brilliant." It was the most high-stakes business negotiation I have ever heard of. He had finally found a way to understand me, to value me. By framing my life's work in the only language he truly understood, the language of a business deal. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. That was in the summer. By the time Christmas rolled around, the world had settled into a new, strange, and quiet alignment. I came home for the holidays, as I always did. But this year, it was different. The house was quiet, the usual. Ostentatious Christmas party had been canceled. The season was a somber, more reflective affair. Ethan was there. He was a changed man. He had quit his high-flying corporate job. The near-death experience had been a brutal, but effective, wake-up call. It had stripped him of his arrogance, of his ambition, of the things he thought had defined him. He was quieter now, more thoughtful. He was, for the first time in his life, genuinely interested in other people. Our relationship was still a work in progress. It was a fragile, new thing. We didn't talk about the past, but we started to build a new future. We took long walks. We talked about books. We found a quiet, tentative new ground on which to stand as brother and sister. The most important conversation happened on Christmas Eve. My father asked me to join him in his study for a glass of port. We sat in silence for a while, watching the fire crackle in the hearth. "I was a fool, Maya," he finally said, his voice quiet, his eyes fixed on the flames. "I've been a fool for a very long time." He turned to look at me, his face full of a deep, painful regret. "I spent your entire life valuing the wrong things. I measured success in money, in titles, in the things people could see. I was so proud of Ethan's loud, shiny accomplishments. And I was so dismissive of your quiet, steady ones. I never understood what you were building. I never understood what you were becoming." He shook his head, a look of profound self-recrimination on his face. "I thought I was raising a captain of industry, and I was. But I was also raising a hero, a woman of incredible strength, and courage, and integrity. And I was too blind, too arrogant, to see it." He looked at me, his eyes full of tears. "I am so proud of you, Maya. Not for what you did for your brother, but for who you are. Can you ever forgive an old fool like me?" And in that moment, the last of the old hurt, the old resentment, just washed away. "There's nothing to forgive, Dad," I said. "That Christmas was the best one I have ever had. It was quiet, it was real, it was a family, wounded and broken, slowly, carefully, learning how to put itself back together in a new, more honest way. I have come to understand that my family didn't see me, not because they didn't love me, but because they didn't have the language to understand me. Their world was one of simple, clear, and loud metrics of success. My world, the world of service, of quiet competence, of a different kind of strength, was a foreign country to them. And they were afraid of it. Ethan's kidnapping, as terrible as it was the crisis that forced them to learn a new language. It forced them to see that the skills they had dismissed as useless were, in fact, life-saving. It forced them to see that the daughter they had called the black sheep was, in fact, the shepherd of their flock. So, thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever felt like the black sheep in your own family, if you've ever chosen a path that no one else understood, I see you. Your path has its own purpose. Your skills have their own unique value, and one day, in a way you can never expect, you might just be the person your family needs most. Hit that subscribe button if you believe that true strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it just quietly, competently, gets the job done. And remember, true honor isn't about the job title your family wants for you. It's about the character you build for yourself, brick by painful, quiet, and honorable brick.